In around a week, this channel will have run consistently for a whole year. We made it above 1000 subs, so it has gone quite well in my book. To celebrate this, I want to treat you guys to something nice. You see, the Call of Duty series has been the main attraction on this channel, but I've only covered the games in the main line. There are quite a few quote-unquote spin-offs that I haven't covered. I want to do that today. For this first game, we'll be going all the way back to the beginning again with Call of Duty Finest Hour. Finest Hour was released on November 16th, 2004, developed by Spark Unlimited. It was the first console COD. Many dismissed it, however, as simply a console port of the original Call of Duty released the previous year. But no, it had its very own levels. Some do look a lot like the levels from the original, but the game was fairly well received despite this. Most of the critiques were similar to the ones for the previous. The battles lacked scale and the levels would have some insane difficulty spikes. There really isn't a lot of information about the development of this game, but now we can jump right in.
You have killed the German!
Instead of ending with the Soviets, we start with them here. You'll be fighting at Stalingrad as well as partaking in Little Saturn, where you capture an airfield at Tatsinskaya. You start at the Volga crossing. You're met with a jaw-dropping sight right off the bat. You emerge from the fog and see the ruins of Stalingrad. The situation escalates as you close in on the docks. Stukas bomb you and you watch your comrades storm up the hill in the background. Like the Volga mission in the 2003 COD, this takes heavy inspiration from Enemy at the Gates, including the only 1 in 3 had a rifle myth that we've already debunked. Here you only get a clip as well. Despite looking very similar to the OG COD, this mission does play out quite differently. You rush up the hill through a trench in an incredible spectacle. When you get to the top, you simply wait for Adi to stop and then you can push into the city. After dodging these machine gunners, you reach the refinery. Already here, you get a rifle and your first firefight commences. It's dark and covered in red, like the blood that covered the streets in The Real Thing, as you push through these ruins. Eventually, the Germans fall back and you begin your pursuit. You get to a railway where you watch this officer rile up his men before sending them full frontal at machine guns. You go around the flank with Pushkov. You get across the tracks and destroy the German machine guns in the station and the mission ends. The next mission picks up where we left off. You need to clear the rest of the building and get to Mamev Kurgan. Here you find out that you can open doors in this game. After clearing the house, this mission's objective comes into view, this hill. First you have to repel a German assault though. After mowing down wave after wave, your buddy gets sniped, but that sniper is quickly dealt with by Tanya Pavlovna. Now it's time to storm the hill and capture the bunker on top. This part is quite thrilling. The level is very open and you basically go from MG position to MG position, taking them out. The music crescendos as the Germans desperately tries to hold on against the Soviet horde. It's loud and many soldiers are on the battlefield. It feels huge. It's unlike anything in the 2003 COD. After that intense struggle, you make it to the bunker and tear down their banner. Tanya is very impressed with you. In the next mission, you'll be playing as Tanya. As the mission starts, Tanya kills this officer and now it's your turn to take out the rest. After killing a few, a sapper comes into the arena. You gotta cover him so he can place an anti-tank mine. After destroying the tank, you're told to get to the tractor factory to protect your tanks. You move out onto the street. The level is actually very well populated. It doesn't feel empty. You end up having to go through sewers because the street fighting is too ferocious. You climb in through a manhole. In the sewers, we go back to some classic FPS design with cram hallways and the occasional open room. After surviving the sewers, you get into this hole that leads to the factory. The mission ends. You have now arrived at the tractor factory. This is the first time that the difficulty really spikes. You're defending against waves of German that either come from the left or the right. You have to snipe machine gunners or anti-tank infantry. This game also has infuriatingly few save checkpoints, so you'll have to do it all over again if you die. When you do get through it, you have to cover for the tank crew real quick, then they crew the tank and you roll off to begin the next mission. This is the tank mission. The tank breaks down right off the bat, and now you gotta cover the mechanic. After holding back the Germans for a while, you get to drive the tank. From a technical standpoint, this part plays exactly like the one in the main game. You drive through the streets defending yourself against Panzerschrecks and other tanks. Not really a lot to comment on right here. Eventually you get to a general's headquarters. You park the tank and meet him inside. The artillery's forward observers have gone quiet and you gotta get them a replacement radio. The mission ends as you board the tank again. You move through more streets while protecting the tank from various threats. Eventually you help the infantry take this train station. You disembark inside the train station. You once again take it room by room. As you get to the artillery squad, you get this really nice Saving Private Ryan reference where the wall comes down and you're face to face with the enemy. Right after this, you make it to the top so you can deliver the radio. You watch the artillery destroy an armored column as the mission ends. Now your time in Stalingrad ends and you take part in Little Saturn, which also happened near Stalingrad. You're assaulting an airfield. You gotta help the artillery set up by keeping some Stukas off of them. When you've done that, they begin shelling the base, and now you gotta get in there with the other tanks. In here it gets pretty heated. You take fire from all sides, you get ambushed by tanks. It took me a few tries, but nothing too bad though. After a hard push, you dismount inside this warehouse. After clearing it, you get to the last Soviet mission. Now you're gonna assault the airfield itself. You start the same as last, drive around, take out tanks and planes. Eventually you get to the runway where planes are taking off. Now you can take hit after hit from armor-piercing shells, but God forbid you get grazed by a Stuka's lousy wing. I had to restart this mission an infuriatingly amount of times because of this. So much so that my absolute rage corrupted the recording, so I can't show you the end of the mission, but believe it or not, the assault is successful and the Soviet campaign concludes. I enjoyed this campaign. I actually prefer these levels to the Soviet levels in the original. It did feel a bit empty at times, but not on the same level as that game. But it's also not quite at COD 2 level of action-packed. I thought the crossing the Volga part in this game was much better executed. It looked incredible and felt incredible. You feel so small in the face of this battle. It substitutes the relentless violence of the later games with barren pictures of a destroyed city on fire. This left quite the impression. The British campaign takes you to North Africa. You'll be playing as Carlyle and raiding a Tunisian town named Matmata, as well as besieging a fortress. The assault on Matmata was part of the bigger assault on the Mareth Line, which was a series of fortifications built by the French, but in World War II it was occupied by a German-Italian force. The idea was that they could poke a hole that could lead them to Tunis. However, this mission takes place on January 22nd, 1943, but the real thing didn't happen until March of that year. Like I said in the beginning of the series, in these early CODs, the dates are wrong. A lot. Anyways, you're heading in to destroy as much of the German stuff as possible and then escape. You sneak as close as possible and begin the attack. First order of business is taking out the machine guns. Now North Africa is a lot more open than the streets of Stalingrad, and the design reflects that. After dealing with the machine guns, you begin looking for the German headquarters. A tank shows up, but you deal with it quickly. When you find the HQ, you're immediately pinned by a barrage of machine gun fire. After taking the headquarters, you begin making your way to the compost. After securing it and destroying the antenna, you get thrust right into a fierce firefight. The whole town lights up like a Christmas celebration as a hail of gunfire hits you and the boys. You gotta capture a fortress. Fighting through the town is another part I had to do over a few times. Eventually you blow up the generator and the mission ends as a successful raid on Matmata. You pick up right after blowing the generator. Every German is coming to get you, so you gotta be swift but careful. Shortly after the first shots, panzers roll in. 3 of them, and it's up to you to place these mines exactly right so they blow up the tank. After this, you can proceed to the petrol stocks. After braving machine guns and ambushes in the surprisingly cramped streets of the city, you get to the depot and blow up the petrol. After this, you jump on the jeep and roll out. In this next mission, it's morning and the jeep needs refueling. You gotta make sure your boys have the opportunity to do so. The Germans show up immediately and you gotta rendezvous with the rest of the Brits. You climb on the 50 cal and here you get the chase sequence. You drive through various skirmishes, taking out anyone in your path as you close in on this fort. When you get there, you end up crashing into it as this mission ends. And let me tell you, this next one brought me to the end of my wits. It was infuriating. You have to blow up these archways as Germans pour in through them, swarming you at every opportunity. The amount of machine guns that will randomly open up on you will drive you to manslaughter. In the end, you have this part where you have to protect a sergeant. You fail if he dies. In this part, there's a half-track blocking your path that you gotta blow up. When I got here after 40 minutes of trial and error, the fucking moron of a sergeant just stood next to it like a toilet brush and got himself blown up. And I had to do it all over again. Eventually, though, I got to the corporal and the mission concluded along with the campaign. This campaign ended up playing quite differently. Driving through the desert and raiding Matmata brought a very different atmosphere. One more akin to animals hunting in the wild rather than the heavy industry of a city. It did infuriate me at times, but I made it through even though the last mission definitely took years off of my life. Speaking of that mission, it is a really good-looking mission with the heavy fighting in these old ruins. Also, the layout always brought a way forward even though it could be hard to find. In the American campaign, you fight for Aachen, making it the first major German city to fall. Then you fight across the West German countryside until you can secure a bridge across the Rhine. To start off, you have to escort a tank column through the city, defending it from Panzerschrecks. You have areas where the tanks stop and get swarmed by all sorts of German infantry. In between those parts, hidden machine guns will ambush you and they can mow you down real quick. This part can also get really infuriating and I had to do it over a few times. I ended up spending 30 minutes trying to get through here. Eventually you get to this tunnel where the fight gets really tense. It's dark, cram, and it seems the enemy is around every corner. After that last part, my heart was going 140 through this whole tunnel. When you get out on the street again, you mow down some krauts and destroy this building. In the next mission, you find yourself back in the sewers. You gotta blow up some ladders so the Germans can't use the manholes for ambushing. I actually ended up being stuck for a bit on this level as well. It's composed of very narrow pathways that occasionally open up into a bigger chamber. In those, there are usually machine guns and entire companies waiting for you. After destroying the ladder and clearing this tunnel, you can leave through the basement where the mission ends. As the next one starts, you ambush these unsuspecting Germans in this house. Eventually, you spot 1st Battalion and you gotta provide infantry support. The Germans ambush it and you gotta keep them off the tanks. Following that, you have a bit of a repeat of the first American mission. You move through the buildings protecting the tanks from Panzerschrecks. Then you continue on the street. Eventually you encounter some German tanks that you gotta deal with. You end up having to take quite the detour to get into position. The Germans are still popping out from everywhere. Eventually you get to shoot the tanks in the butt. After that, the M12 tank attacks its target and the mission is over. That was it for the Battle of Aachen. Now you play as Sam Rivers, an African-American tank commander in the 1st Armored Division. He will be taking part in the Battle of the Bulge. In this mission, you're gonna be taking the town of Tillet, which will cut the supply line to Bastogne. You're in a tank, and when you zoom in, it looks like the whole front of the tank is extending, which I thought was quite funny. First, you encounter this tank squadron in a valley. After clearing them, the artillery will deploy in the area. You gotta defend them until then. After that, you move out. The road ahead is very treacherous. 88s, tanks, and Panzerschrecks are lurking in the trees, awaiting you. After a fierce fight, you arrive in Tillet. In here, it really mirrors the Soviet tank mission. You evade ambushes and disembark to clear hardpoints. Towards the end, you repel a German assault with Panzerschrecks. It gets pretty fierce, because infantry accompany the tanks. It's actually insane how fierce and tough this level gets the further you move. But eventually you send the Germans packing. We're back with the infantry. Now you gotta enter Remagen to secure a bridge across the Rhine. The mission is basically just spent going through Remagen to find the bridge. You get viciously attacked from the Germans. After the mission is over, you have to play a mission similar to the first Aachen mission. You have to escort the tanks. This mission also brought me to the absolute end of my wits. You get swarmed over and over again. It's infuriating. You go through the city, this depot, and then through these German positions. At the end, you will have located the bridge, and it's time for the final mission. In this mission, you have to storm the bridge, preventing the Germans from blowing it up. This level played out quite interestingly. It's basically completely open. The only cover you'll have is a few broken bridge pieces and the support. Despite this, however, it was surprisingly easy. It did have some tricky moments, like how you're in a full-on MG kill zone towards the end of the bridge. In the next section, you're gonna be clearing the 2 towers on the far side. And to top it all off, at the very end, you shoot down some planes. After that, you watch as the US Army rolls into the German heartland as the mission and the game comes to a close. This game was fun. It uses the pace and aggression of United Offensive, but puts it in similar set pieces as the original. This game feels like an enhanced version, but it does have its own characteristics. Unique set pieces like Matmata and some dynamic mission phases like when you mount and dismount the tanks. One thing it sadly also took from United Offensive is the absurd difficulty spikes. Once again, the game's base mechanics can't keep up with the game's pace. That, combined with the way too spaced out checkpoints, creates moments that are truly infuriating and almost made me quit making this video entirely. Other than that, it was an incredible experience. Now we can move on to Big Red 1. Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1 was released on November 1st, 2005. It was Treyarch's first Call of Duty game. In this game, you follow the American 1st Infantry Division, also known as the Big Red One. You go through Operation Torch in North Africa, Operation Husky in Italy, and the Western Front. The game was very well liked. It featured actors from the miniseries Band of Brothers, where you follow the 101st Airborne Division from Normandy to the Siegfried Line. The game is now fondly remembered by fans. When looking into this game, I also want to compare it to the real story of the Big Red One in World War II. You start with a prologue that actually takes place in France. You storm into Maubeuge to secure a bridgehead for the tanks. Here you learn to play the game. You go through the city and do various things like clear ruins, blow up tanks and assault German hardpoints. Eventually you get blown up and lie dazed on the street. Your body comes to help you. The screen fades to black and we get back to November 1942 during Operation Torch in North Africa. You're on the first day of the invasion, and you'll be fighting the French, actually. This is the only time in COD history that you actually fight Vichy France. I think it's cool that they were included and not just replaced with the Africa Corps. Here you take part in the Oran Front, which is true to the Big Red One history. You start in a troop transport. Your objective is an airfield, and here we have our first inaccuracy. The airfield was actually the 11th Airborne Division's objective, and the Big Red One's was the city of Oran itself. The squad's banter is quickly interrupted by a hidden French emplacement. You start off by manning the 50 cal and laying heavy fire onto the French position. You breach the airfield gates where you disembark. You go in to clear the barracks. You enter the next building to destroy a machine gun. One thing I noticed right away is actually how charming this game looks. It's very reminiscent of games like Battlefield Heroes or Brass Brigade. Another thing is that the devs tries to compensate for more action-packed gameplay by reducing bullet damage. Still no regenerating health though. This makes the game less infuriating and mostly removes the insane difficulty spikes, but it also makes the firefights less tense. You go through the building and get to the hangars. You push through the hangar and get to another one. Stukas begin taking off as you enter. You can jump and the machine gun and blow them up. The French are still resisting fiercely. This is basically what you do for the next section. Push through the complex and eventually you reconnect with the convoy from earlier. You end up outside again. Here you gotta move quickly because the French are shooting from all directions and there's no real cover except the vehicles. At the end of this stockpile area you have to push through another hangar, but this one is full of half-tracks. Eventually you can climb to the observation tower where you get to snipe. After clearing the airfield you gotta fend off some Stukas with the AA gun. The mission ends as you move out to fortify the airfield. The next mission takes place on February 13th, 1943. I couldn't find anything specific to the Big Red One on that date other than it was preluding the Battle of Kasserine Pass. This is a tank mission. You're getting a ride, but you get to control the tank. You drive an M3 Stuart, which is pretty cool, but I mean it's just a standard COD tank mission. Up next is Kasserine Pass. This is a battle the Big Red One actually fought in. They had multiple regiments throughout the American defensive line. This takes place on the very first day, only a few hours into the battle. You start by driving through the American position until a tank rolls up right in front of you. Now the plan has changed and you gotta defend the position instead. The Africa Corps is relentless here. This mission is very similar to United Offensive's Bastogne mission. You're in the foxhole holding back the Germans, but here you have anti-tank cannons. Things seem to be going quite well until a tiger shows up and you take cover in the foxholes. It gets pretty close, but your tanks arrive just in time to save you. The tankers give you your next objective: escort the engineers so they can clear a minefield. However, in the real thing, minefields were mainly a worry for the Germans. The Germans are supposed to be on the offensive here, so for them to lay out minefields seems like a lot of trouble for, well, nothing. Unless they're suspecting a counterattack, but that wouldn't come until 3 days after this. Anyways, you move up to the cliffs. I love the way this level looks. The fighting moves through ruins and desolate desert landscape, yet combined with the art style, it actually gives everything a lively feel. This game really has character. Eventually you get to this cliffside where you get face to face with a panzer group, but thankfully you find another conveniently placed Panzerschreck and take them out. After this you can go straight into the pass where you'll find the minefield. As the engineers show up, a sniper reveals himself. Your sniper gets sniped too, so now the job is yours. After taking him out, you get on the 50 to cover the engineers. After that, you gotta go recapture your artillery. To get there, you have to go through this village. On the other side, you find them using your guns against your tanks. You fight a tough fight, even taking on an armored vehicle, but eventually clear the position. The flyboys show up and the day is won. Now we head straight to Kasserine. In this mission, you defend the city of Kasserine from a German counterattack. It gets pretty tough. The infantry swarms you and you gotta try and outrun a fucking tank. Eventually you enter the half-track as you have to pull out. Now you get to the last mission of the North African part. Here you aren't with the Big Red 1. You play as a bombardier on a bomber. We go all the way back to the opening hours of Operation Torch. You gotta clear the way for the 1st Infantry Division. It's basically like the missions in United Offensive, except you get to control when the bombs are released. It was really fun, but nothing extraordinary. Now you are done in North Africa. The next big campaign for the Big Red 1 is Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. We start by landing at Gela. They get the time and date correct. It's 3 a.m. July 10th, 1943. When you get close to the beach, you begin clearing mines with the 50 cal. The Italians are resisting fiercely. You immediately get into the trenches and begin clearing the German-Italian forces facing the beach. Eventually you get to this hard point that's heavily defended. Some of your boys try to deal with it but gets blown up. Now you gotta blow up the barbed wire with a bazooka. After that you start pushing inland. For this next part you just finish off the coastal battery. You move through trenches and other sorts of fortifications. After clearing this bridge, you begin making your way into the city to attack the Italian garrison. In here it gets pretty tense. We haven't really had urban combat yet in this game, and that's what you get here. There are also quite a few cinematic moments like this crashing glider. You meet with everyone else in this courtyard. You gotta go secure the wreck of the glider because some might still be alive. Defending this glider from attacking Italians is the first time this game gets genuinely hard. They come from all levels and directions. Now that that's done, it's time to regroup at the rendezvous. In the next mission, we jump to the next day. You start outside of Gela by a place called Piano Lupo. The boys are chilling at camp when Stukas begin raining bombs upon you. You quickly man the AA guns to destroy the planes. You have to protect the artillery. After that, you regroup by this farm. You begin pushing forward. Right around here I started to feel the absolute fatigue of every element in these classic COD games. I think that that's mainly a product of time. These games were groundbreaking back in the early 2000s, but looking back, once the history charm wears off, it gets pretty meh. Eventually, you get to this Italian convoy. You call in the artillery and destroy it. This is something that actually happened during this battle. It was a pretty important part of the battle since the Italians couldn't reach their garrison in Gela. After this, you fight through some ruins and this pass until you reach the 82nd Airborne. Now you gotta hold back an Italian assault. This part actually looks really cool. You have this whole fortified position and you have a variety of tools at your disposal. After calling in a grand slam on the tanks, the mission ends. Now we fast forward to August 5th at Troina. You move in and on the tank but get ambushed. You begin fighting up the street as the fight gets tougher and tougher. Most of this mission is just that, but you do get to use an MG34 to cover some guys. At the end, you go after this 88 in a church. The verticality of this part makes it a little tough, but after that the Sicily campaign ends. Now we get to D-Day. The Big Red 1 landed at the Easy Red and Fox Green sectors of Omaha Beach. Here they were massacred. Some companies reached a full 95% casualty rate within the first hour. Now Omaha Beach is a place I've actually been and I saw the Big Red 1 monument, but for some reason I only took a picture of the 2nd Infantry Division's monument. The mission starts as you approach the beach on this transport ship. Eventually you come under heavy fire, then you call in the naval artillery from the boat. Eventually it becomes your turn to hit the beaches. You begin clearing your way through this draw. This whole mission is just intense. Just like the Point to Hawk mission in the main game, this knocks it out of the park. You have this slow forward push where the Germans make you fight for every millimeter. Eventually you reach the German emplacement and begin clearing it. There is so much going on around you, it can get pretty overwhelming. You destroy mortars and clear bunkers. After clearing this supply depot, you get to this open position with an 88 that you gotta assault. At the end, you have this part where you gotta hold back the Germans and use this 88. I had to redo this part, but after that, the mission is over. Next, we're going to Mons. You gotta recon the city. Stukas begin harassing you as you approach, but when you get to this tank scrapyard, you get ambushed. You decide to outrun the Germans, fending off armored cars. Eventually you crash and end up on the ground. Immediately you get hit by some infantry. The Germans come hard. Eventually you gotta run through the woods while the Germans bring down the thunder onto you. You get to this mill that you seize. Now you gotta defend it as the Germans counterattack. After that, you gotta go destroy a German 88 position. You make your way through the treacherous French countryside until you arrive at the battery. While storming the last position, Sergeant Hawkins gets hit and the mission ends with you carrying him off on a stretcher. Next up is Eilendorf. This mission starts with a very moody shot of you crossing a river on a boat. It's foggy and rainy. It really feels like you're going head first into the unknown. You paddle through artillery fire but make it safely to the riverbank. You immediately come under heavy fire by the road. You try to follow the Shermans but you're quickly forced to find another way. You arrive at this cemetery. On the other side, you have a tough fight through German trenches and bunkers. You gotta destroy these AA guns. That's basically what you do for this whole mission. You go through this position and destroy various German guns. It's quite tense and very atmospheric with the whole fog and rain. Now we move to the penultimate mission. In these next two missions, you are making your way to and breaking through the Siegfried line. You start by following these tanks through this village. This part has a very basic structure. You follow the tanks until they stop, and then you clear nearby buildings. They all kinda look the same too. At the end of this section, you come under mortar fire and you gotta go get them. You also take the opportunity to neutralize the 88. After this, you continue behind the tank and clear more houses. After clearing the last house, you capture a German tank to go and assist your Shermans. Shortly after leaving the town, you encounter a tiger. You have a bit of a duel with it, but after the duel, tanks pop out from every corner. You fight a tough fight until you run out of gas. Here the mission ends, and in the next you'll be taking the final dash to the Siegfried line. You assault the line immediately, clearing bunkers and everything. Behind this hill you find the bulk of it. Pillboxes, towers, and a wide variety of obstacles. This part is actually a little hard. You gotta go through the obstacles while under very heavy fire from the various emplacements. On the other side of that part, you gotta clear this super bunker. After that, you gotta clear a trench system, and then you get to this bridge. You fight your way under it. On the other side, you plant charges on these V2 rockets and blow them up, and then the mission is over, and so is the game. Out of the 3 games in this video, this is definitely my favorite. I love the way it looks. It has this charming, almost comic book-like art style, and the level design features huge, diverse landscapes. It wasn't nearly as frustrating as Finest Hour. I also love the idea of following the same company the whole game. You are around the same characters from 1942 all the way to 1945. I was very happy with this game, and now we can move on to the last game, Final Fronts. This game most people believed was also just a PS2 port of its name twin. No, this game takes place in different areas at different times of the war. We still get to play in the Pacific, but Okinawa is the only battle that the main game and this one shares. Although this game also has creepy menu music, its atmosphere is quite different. Treyarch's World at War brought a hellish and brutal atmosphere. No heroism, only mindless slaughter. This game, however, is more in line with the classic CODs. Now, the classic CODs were groundbreaking for their time. This game still came out after COD 4, which is why it wasn't nearly as well received as the other 2 games in this video. People had mostly the same problem with this game that they would have with Modern Warfare 3. It felt soulless and bland, as if the devs were given a checklist and just had to tick off every box. The game does have its moment, but for the most part it's played with AI that pushes you out into the open, repetitive mission structure, and it's just all around boring. Now let's go through the game. You start at basic training in 1942. Here you just learn the basics of the game. About halfway through, you have a really cool transition where you get thrown into this puddle, and when you re-emerge, it's 1943 and you're at Guadalcanal. It really looks like hell right here. Blackened sky, and the only light is from the flames of the war. The game starts with a bang. You have to help the flamethrower get up on this hill so he can burn the pillboxes. However, after he's done that, he dies to a tripwire. Now you gotta use the flamethrower to clear this tunnel system. At the end of it, you get to this village, which really looks like Semper. Here you move through and destroy some AA guns. Eventually you get down to the beach. This part actually looks really cool. Eventually you provide covering fire for the rest of your boys. After this, you just watch some Japanese ship blow up as the mission ends. Now you go to capture BDO. As the mission starts, you're approaching the beach. It's a slaughter, but you make it and reach the beach wall. You get into the trench where you just move through the position, clearing various obstacles. Eventually you make it to the other side. Here I was kinda impressed with how populated the levels are. There's a lot more going on around you and the terrain is very rough. Here you're pinned down and you get saved by the artillery. After that you blow up some naval guns, clear more trenches, and the mission ends. Now you go after the BDO airfield. You start out by watching a bold flamethrower man burn these bunkers that has you pinned outside the airfield. He ends up dying, so you gotta take advantage of the hole he made immediately. You begin making your way through these ruins. On the other side, you cross the runway as the Japanese charge you. You enter the trench and go through. Now you have some AA guns to destroy. The fight through here gets pretty tense, and on the other side you get to a bunker. After that you get out onto the runway where you face off against some tanks. Next you gotta assault the enemy HQ. It's tough, but you capture it. Obviously the Japanese will try and take it back and you gotta stop them. Infantry as well as tanks come at you, but eventually your own tanks show up and it's over. Now we move from BDO to Saipan. The mission starts with you fending off a ferocious Japanese counterattack. It's a tough fight, but eventually it's time to push forward. You move along the shore. I really like the night setting of this level. It really helps elevate the tension. You arrive at this beach where you notice some of your comrades are having a hard time getting onto the island. You blow up the pillboxes with a bazooka. Next you enter the Japanese complex and begin clearing it. After putting the bunker complex out of action, you find yourself at this position. You gotta defend once more. This part actually got quite hard. The Japanese banzai the shit out of you while the tanks slowly roll up. But after repelling the assault, the mission ends. Now you're going after the mountain. The climb begins immediately. This mission mainly consists of clearing trenches and making your way through the caves. After a tough fight, you make it to your objective, the mountain's artillery.
Hot lead, that warm you up, Eddie?
Now we completely diverge from the main game, as we take part in the Battle of the Bulge. This mission takes place in Luxembourg. You're pinned outside of Ettelbruck. You decide to go around the flank across a frozen river. The dense jungles of the Pacific is replaced with the wide open fields of Europe. After fighting through this court, you enter the guardhouse. After clearing it, you fuck up this German convoy that drives straight in front of you. You hold the house for a while until German armor shows up and you decide to pull away from your position. You end up fighting your way through the ruins and this wine cellar, until you get to the street again. Here you almost succumb to the Panzer, but you are saved last minute by a Sherman. Now you gotta escort the tank through the town, fending off anti-tank units. You continue like this until you make the Germans pull back and the mission ends. This next mission is a tank mission. It differs from the others by basically being an on-rail shooter. You don't get to drive the tank, only shoot. You're going to Bastogne. As for the mission itself, it's nothing special. You have this part where you drive through the open while shooting at other tanks, and that whole section just looks comically clunky, even for its time. After that, you just ride into Bastogne, take out a tiger, and that's it. Now you become British. You are infiltrating Bastogne to relieve the boys. You start off with a little stealth section, and after that you take this mill where you can snipe the Germans from. When you continue, you get to this bridge with 2 German snipers covering it. I don't know why, but this proved way harder than it sounds. For some reason I just couldn't hit. After that you sneak into these ruins where the firefight picks up. From here you just continue through town, clearing houses and dealing with snipers. Eventually you get to this courtyard where you blow up some tanks and then fend off a vicious German counterattack. The mission ends shortly after dealing with them. For this next mission you're saving your captain during the Battle of Bure. You disembark and fight through the streets, taking out vehicles, machine guns, and all sorts of things until you reach the captain at the church. He's wounded, and for the rest of this mission you defend him from various German assaults. Eventually you board this jeep and make your way out. Then the mission ends and the Winter Offensive chapter concludes. The Allies have made it to the Rhine. This first mission again really isn't that interesting. You just go through town, blow up some artillery, take out some armored vehicles and fend off counterattacks. I mean, it's intense and it's cool that the Soviet theme from the main game plays. The next mission you move in on Braunau. Here you gotta take out some V2s. You spend the majority of the mission making your way through this bunker complex. That last push to the rocket is actually pretty tough though.
They're dug in at each end of the trench, sir.
We're back in the Pacific during the Battle of Okinawa. In the first mission you assault the Shuri line. Again you just clear trenches, caves and bunkers. The Pacific levels are definitely higher intensity. I do want to bring up this section however, cause it was pretty well executed. You follow a Sherman through this swamp as the Japanese harass you from every side. It's quite hard. Eventually you make it to Shuri Castle. For now you just approach. After that you get to the last mission, Battle of Shuri Castle, which is also in the main game. The mission starts the same with you rushing up towards the castle. You blow through the main gate and enter the castle perimeter. You fight your way to the inner courtyard where, like in the main game, you fend off attacking Japanese soldiers. It's not nearly as intense as in that game though. After doing that, the mission ends as well as the game. I'm gonna be honest. I don't know if it's because I played these games back to back, but Final Fronts was pretty boring. In the beginning it was interesting enough and the Pacific levels really has a lot of punch, but beyond that it just feels like Modern Warfare 3 foreshadowing. Like it came out just to come out rather than actually having an idea for a good game. The level gimmicks were recycled from the classics and it truly does feel like they were just handed a checklist. I don't really have a lot more to say about it other than it was fine, but incredibly uninspired. That was all I have for you today. Bye bye.